Right there. Let's call a meeting of the Laguna Grande Regional Joint Powers meeting to order. It's October 14th at 6 p.m. Let's do roll call.
Chair Pacheco,
Here.
Board Member Raskoff,
Present.
Board Member Garcia.
Here. Great. Number 3 is the public comment. Members of the public wishing to address the JPA on matters within its jurisdiction, but not on this agenda, may do so during the public comment period for up to 3 minutes. For the public record, please state your name. So why don't you go ahead, sir?
Thank you. Good evening, board members. Stephen Cry, 65 Laguna Grande Court, Monterey resident. Since we're doing updates tonight, I might as well give you one from the neighborhood perspective. Last week, we had an incident in the park. There was a gentleman screaming early in the morning, screaming for help. I heard him about 4 o'clock in the morning. He woke us up, woke the dog up. We went outside, listening to him. I yelled back. He was in such close range. If he needed help, he said, "Yes, help, help." So I called 911. 911 came out and it was dark. They couldn't find him. I met 2 Seaside Police Department officers and took him down and we walked down into the island and they could hear him. It was still dark outside. We couldn't see him. He was still screaming for help. While we were down there, we found 3 tents. So there are people still inhabiting the area down there. So I went back up to my backyard and I took a recording for you, an audio recording that I hope to play for you. Kind of gives you an idea of what we've been going through the last 30 years since I've lived there. It's been off and on, but so he would scream to exhaustion, catch his breath and start up again. Like I said, I heard him about 4 o'clock. This recording was about 5:15. EMTs showed up or when it was light and they couldn't find him. The brush is so overgrown. They came from the Seaside direction. They came from my backyard down the hill. They had their pickaxes out. They couldn't get through the heavy underbrush. This isn't the first time that we've been here. This isn't the first time I've stood before you to talk about this incident, the park. You know, we're asking you to do something. I understand it's slow. The process is slow, but when it comes to life safety, they couldn't find the guy. I mean, was he still laying down there? Who knows? Did he get up and walk away? Hopefully so. I don't know what else to do. You know, this is going on probably 8 years for me. Coming in front of the JPA, we got you guys together to finally meet again. We've been to the city councils, Seaside, Monterey, and the Parks District. Please, we have to do something. It's overwhelming. It's time to do something. So that's it. My time's almost up. Anyways,
Thank you. Is there anybody on Zoom? Okay. Seeing no one on Zoom and no more public comment, let's move on, I believe. Oh, I'm sorry.
Hi, I'm Michelle Card. Just one thing, his time ran out and you forgot to mention that when the EMTs went behind our yard with the pickaxes, they actually couldn't get down there. And I asked them about the fire danger and they said, oh yeah. Basically, if there was a fire, which is very likely, I mean, is not unlikely with the high rains that we had and then the dry weather, and then you have homeless, people maybe sparking a little spark there. If it did go up to our houses, they can't get there. That's basically what happened with them not being able to get down to get to that gentleman. They also wouldn't be able to get down if there was a fire. So 30 years of deferred maintenance means there's lots of overgrowth. And that's scary for us to live right up there with that, knowing that if there was emergency personnel, they can't get down there. So I know that we're in the process of permits and all those kind of things. I understand that and I appreciate it. But what can we do in the very near future to mitigate the fire danger, if nothing else? That's my question for you. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Seeing no other comments, maybe staff of Monterey or Seaside can get with them at a later time and see if there's any quick fixes or short-term fixes until this moves on. Item 4 is approved minutes from April 8th, 2024, regular meeting.
Before we vote on that, there seemed to be an inconsistency in the meeting minutes that I need to have resolved. We had the number 1 was Chair Pacheco calls meeting to order at 6:01, but then in roll call, Chair Pacheco is listed as absent. So it seems like those two things
I
are,
probably was absent if I recall.
well, then you didn't call the meeting to order. So one of those two things is wrong. So we need to figure out which one of them it is.
Let's go with you being absent.
I think you called the meeting.
I think I did as
Yeah.
well. So, but that should be corrected before we approve that.
So we can maybe approve them at. Yeah, then that's corrected. Okay. So is there a motion as corrected at a later date possibly? Or you want to bring this back at the,
There's 2 sets of minutes on there.
yeah, I think we're going to do April 1st and then do July 2nd, I guess. Yeah, April 8th first, but then we'll approve the minutes of July meeting 2nd, I think. Yeah, we approve of those minutes with those corrections? Okay, is there a motion on that?
If that was a motion, I'll second.
Good. Any public comment? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, second one is approved minutes from July 22nd, 2024, regular meeting.
Move to approve.
Is there a second?
I will second.
Okay, any comments from the public? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, so approved. Item 5, provide an update on the permitting process for the implementation of the trail maintenance and vegetation strategy. And staff. Mr. Rios, looks like.
Good evening, JPA Board, Dan Miwas, Recreation Director. At this time, I'd like to welcome Beth Matz with BFS Landscape to provide you with an update on the permitting process.
Good evening, board members. I'm glad to be back tonight. I'm glad to share with you some of the updates we have in terms of where the permitting process is and what we've kind of accomplished since we last met in July. Grab this here. Okay. So one thing I'll do is we'll just kind of run through what our kind of schedule was during July through today's date. And then I would like to give a little bit of some bulleted points on where we are with each individual permit, so you can understand what the I'm sorry, what the coordination efforts have been so far and where we're at with each individual agency. Oh, there it goes. Oh, I think I got it. I have to point at this. So we met on July 22nd in 2024, and that for our quarterly JPA meeting. At that point, we had alerted the board and to public that our draft our draft wetland delineation had been completed. And we were looking at then moving forward into understanding what the impacts were going to be from the wetland delineation. All that work has been completed, and I believe the report was circulated to the board by JPA staff. So if you haven't received that, please let me know, and I can make sure you folks get a copy of that. So a couple of the things we also discussed was that we were going to be requesting sort of a preliminary intake meeting with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has recently sort of started a new process in which they take as a role of a lead agency. And the goal is to have one meeting where multiple agencies all come together so we can have one intake meeting and not need to schedule multiple intake meetings. So we got that meeting scheduled. That was scheduled on September 12th, and I'll kind of give a little bit of an update. In August, we had our initial meeting with the California Coastal Commission. That was August 28th. And then in September, we met with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. During September, we started coordination with the JPA and the California Coastal Commission on a consolidated permit approach. I'll explain a little bit of that. And then in October, we are in the process of preparing a restoration plan for the California Coastal Commission. And just today, we had a preliminary intake meeting with the Regional Water Quality Board, and I'll explain a little bit more there. So for the California Coastal Commission, we have to get a permit from them. And one of the things that came to light was that City of Seaside already has an approved coastal plan, but the City of Monterey does not. And so because of that, we had to go through the sort of steps to understand if we could do what's called a consolidated approach for a coastal development permit. We had to approach the California Coastal Commission with our approach, and then we also had to go through and get notices and letters of approval from each individual JPA agency about our consolidated permit approach. And so from our meeting on August 28th, where the Coastal Commission was favorable for a consolidated approach, we then we coordinated with City of Seaside, City of Monterey, and the Monterey Peninsula Regional Park District to receive letters that they agree with the consolidated permit approach. All those letters have been gathered, and we have then have those ready to go for the California Coastal Commission. The other part of our consolidated permit is that we met with JPA staff, specifically with the City of Monterey, because the City of Monterey is also in the process of doing their Fremont Gap Closure process project, which is where they'll be closing the gap between on Fremont Street with a prefabricated bridge. That project is shovel ready and has already gone through all of the CEQA and all the permitting requirements. And the City of Monterey has asked if they could essentially add that project to our coastal permit. Internally, we all said that would be a great idea to get that ball rolling for just trail connectivity. And so we did include we are including the Fremont Gap Closure project as a part of our coastal commission, our coastal development permit. So where we're at today is that we received a letter from the California Coastal Commission after our August 28th meeting, and all overall, the Coastal Commission is favorable for our project. The Coastal Commission is actually in the process of determining if our project could be eligible for a waiver, which would essentially make us not have to go through the full permit process. And what that would entail is we could essentially apply to the Coastal Commission. They would give us a waiver, and then our process with the Coastal Commission could be done. The precedent is very likely that we would be eligible for a waiver, but that has not been determined. So one of the things the Coastal Commission did come back with in terms of their letter after our initial meeting is that they are requesting the preparation of a standalone restoration plan for the project. The restoration plan is an in-depth plan that goes into how the new planting that will be installed, where we're removing invasive species and we're doing site disturbance, how that vegetation is going to be planted, what type of vegetation it is, how it like seeds going to be collected. And then they're looking for a long-term maintenance plan that goes with that. So that was an unexpected request from the Coastal Commission. Our design team, we jumped on that request. We are in the process of completing that. And the restoration plan should be completed on October 25th, which is what you'll see in our schedule. And so once that restoration plan is completed, then we can formally submit to the California Coastal Commission. On September 12th, we met with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers with the hopes that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and the Regional Water Quality Control Board would be present at a preliminary intake meeting. Unfortunately, only two entities showed up to that meeting, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife. At that meeting, both the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife were very favorable for our project. And so U.S. Army Corps of Engineer will be requiring for us to submit a nationwide permit. There is a little bit of internal coordination on the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers side. They're trying to determine exactly what category of permit we are applying into, whether it's a recreation permit or a restoration permit. So internally, we're still waiting on that determination, but we're still moving forward and finalizing the documentation that would go along with that permit process. Luckily, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife will have no involvement with the project, so we're taking one entity out, which is good news for us. But we will be submitting the U.S. Army Corps of Engineer application once we receive that confirmation from them and once the restoration plan is complete. And so we're hoping that that will be in the next month as well. So once we had our September 12th meeting, which unfortunately neither the California Department of Fish and Wildlife or the Regional Water Quality Control Board attended, we had to reach out to both of those agencies independently and schedule meetings with them. To date, we actually met today with the Regional Water Quality Control Board. And our meeting today was very productive. One of the things that has come to light is that we would like our project to be considered a restoration project, which would follow underneath the statewide restoration general order. The Regional Water Quality Control Board, however, has some issues with our language in our project description. So we are working internally as of today to sort of refine our project description. This is the project description that's been in the CEQA documents and all of our other application documents to really highlight the restoration efforts that are going to be a part of the vegetation management. The reason for this is that if we're unable to present this underneath a restoration permit, the costs for a restoration permit are extremely less than what we would be facing if we had to pay for an application under their general permit. So it would behoove us to make sure that we are able to fall underneath a restoration permit. So as of today, the Regional Water Quality Board is internally reviewing. They're looking for us to provide them updated project description, highlighting more of the restoration efforts. But overall, they were generally favorable for our project, and I think they understand the value of what we're trying to accomplish. CDFW, unfortunately, has been unresponsive. Locally, our regional director is a vacated position right now with CDFW, so we don't have anybody who's locally reviewing applications or taking meetings, which means it's being put on to other regional directors to take our project, which is a bit of a challenge because those folks don't necessarily understand our region. They're not familiar with, Laguna Grande Regional Park and what that is. But because we're trying to keep this schedule moving ahead, instead of having a preliminary intake meeting like we've done with all these other agencies, which has been incredibly beneficial because we've been able to really talk with them through what the permit process is going to look like. We've been able to get their input, and they've been able to help us strategize on how to best move forward. With CDFW, we're going to be submitting our application without a preliminary intake meeting. So that is a little bit of a risk, but I think it's one worth taking, especially because of the timeline issues that we're facing. I do want to say, in light of the comment we heard today about the illegal camping and the fire, we actually did bring that up with the Regional Water Quality Board today, what a lot of the concerns are. And they were very sympathetic to what we're trying to accomplish here. But I just want to note that that is something that we have been bringing up and talking about in terms of some of the fire. We specifically talked about both of those things today in our calls with these permitting agencies. And they're really trying internally to work with agencies as well to try and kind of alleviate some of these issues, the permit process taking so long with these emergency issues like fire and illegal camping. So we'll talk a little bit more with them about that. And they have some more things they'd like us to meet in terms of how we're going to deal with displaced people, how we deal with fire management. That's all a part of their review process as well. So just kind of looking forward, it's been a challenge, and I hate, in light of some of the conversation we've had tonight, but we are trying to push this project as far as we can. But because of some of the lack of responsiveness we've had from some of our agencies, our schedule has pushed off a few months. And what we're looking at is sort of all these initial applications getting submitted in the next 3 weeks once the restoration plan is complete and we can fully submit these packages to those entities. And then once we submit the packages to the entities, we will have to go through their review and their comment. And we're trying to anticipate a worst case scenario here. Our original schedule, we had anticipated hopefully having all the permits in hand by February. It's looking more likely, hopefully April at the earliest right now. So that's not the best news that I like to share with you folks tonight, but I do want to provide sort of a holistic kind of a picture of what we're dealing with. And so with that, I thank you for your time. I'm happy to answer any questions, and hopefully we can keep this ball moving forward.
Any question from board members? Question, go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Well, first, thank you very much for that sort of exhausting and exhaustive rundown of things. I think it helps us appreciate sort of the complexity of what we're trying to do here, even though it doesn't maybe seem like we're trying to move mountains. The regulatory framework does not make this easy. And so I, for one, am very happy that you're helping us shepherd through this process because it's daunting at the best. A couple quick questions. I'll just sort of start at the top. Cut me off when you want somebody else to talk. So the Fremont Gap Closure Project, adding that into our permit, does that have any negative implications in terms of increasing our time of review or who has to look at it or costs or anything else like that?
No, during our preliminary meeting with the California Coastal Commission, because we're sort of having a like-minded project, which is increasing coastal access, and it's a public entity project, it's very much in keeping with the vegetation and trail maintenance strategy. So there is no belief of delay that would have on our project.
Great. In terms of the Coastal Commission determination about whether we're eligible for the waiver, what is sort of the differential between if we get waiver or we wind up not getting waiver in terms of time or money in terms of permitting?
That's a great question. So in terms of time, what we would have to go through is we'd have to go through our initial submittal. They would then give us comments and feedback. We'd have to resubmit. Once we get their sort of approved package, then it becomes open for public comment. It goes in front of the commission board. And so we're looking at sort of this longer term schedule, and that is built into the schedule we're presenting.
Okay, that was my next question.
Now, if we got a waiver, we would essentially get a letter, and that letter would say, you know, we've been waived from needing this permit, and we would be able to move forward. The fee question about the coastal development permit, if we got a waiver, their fees would be waived, obviously, but also there's an opportunity that because we're a public access project, we also may not need to pay any fees to the California Coastal Commission either. So it's looking very likely that we won't have any fees in general if we go one way or the other, but it's also looking very likely that we would be highly eligible for a waiver. And just to note, that's based on the precedent that last year, the city of Monterey did some improvements at Laguna Grande on their side of the lake with some lighting improvements and such, and they were given a waiver. So we're using that as the precedent for moving forward with the Coastal Commission.
You mentioned about the sort of in the next steps in terms of the restoration plan.
Yes.
That is being developed. What does the production of that restoration plan, and then you also mentioned the long-term sort of maintenance side of that, are those two different documents? It's all in one?
That's all in one.
Is it already within the scope and boundaries of what your organization has been paid to do, or are we now on the outside of that?
That's a good question. So we are on the outside of that. But what we have agreed on with JPA staff and with BFS is to go ahead and execute that work. And internally, we're working with staff to understand how that's going to get paid and what that looks like. So the cost from EMC, the planners, was about $10,983. And so right now, what we're looking at is one, BFS has initiated the contract. And so now we're working with the JPA staff to understand how that can be paid. But we just didn't want to delay it. And so we probably will come back at some later time to talk about some costs. But we weren't quite sure holistically what all costs would be. So we wanted to package that all together.
One more if I may. Okay. The sort of moving on to the Army Corps and Fish and Wildlife questions, and I guess more precisely the California Fish and Wildlife. I mean, I've got a bunch of questions, but really it kind of comes down to, is there any leverage that either the member agencies of the JPA or the JPA itself can bring to bear to push through any of the roadblocks that seem very high right now? That
would be great. So our two sort of folks who are running through the EMC side, Janet Walther and LaRose, they have tried to exhaust their CDFW Rolodex, and so many of their contacts are no longer with the agency. So if they're today with the Regional Water Quality Board, they did suggest somebody to reach out to, but if there are some names or contacts that we can get from you folks or from the cities or the agencies, that would be great to help us with with kind of moving this project forward.
Would it be fair to say that the staff of the three member agencies is already talking about these things internally and sharing names and ideas if they had them?
100%. Yeah, we have been meeting with the JPA staff now pretty almost weekly for the last 3 or 4 weeks as we're trying to kind of absorb and understand all these different agencies and where they're at.
Okay.
Yeah.
My last question is about the CDFW issues, and it's looking like we're gonna have to go without the intake because they won't meet. You mentioned that it's riskier to go that way. Could you
Sure.
expand on that risk a little bit?
Yeah, I guess the word risky is probably not the right word. So for CDFW, what we're doing is we're applying for a lake and stream bed alteration permit or agreement. So we're essentially saying we're going to be doing work within a water body and we need a permit from you folks to do that. The agreement in and of itself is very straightforward in terms of what's required and the documentation that's required. But when we have these intake conversations, we can explain what the project is. We can give them a presentation and give them an overview of the project. And so they aren't just looking at a blind plan and not really being able to orient themselves without any sort of context. And so having now to go through the CDFW process without that kind of initial context meeting, it just kind of allows for there to maybe be a wide off interpretation of what the project's trying to accomplish. And it doesn't allow us to maybe in an informal setting answer any questions or provide clarification. It would all have to now go through a very formalized process and, they might provide comment and we'd have to respond to comment. And so it becomes a lot more tenuous because once those comments exist, you really can't delete them or erase them because of lack of understanding or miscommunication. So that's the challenge with not having the intake meeting, unfortunately. But the application in and of itself is fairly straightforward. So.
Thank you for
Yeah.
your answers.
Thank you, Beth, for the presentation, and thank you, Kevin. You actually you also hit a couple questions that I had, so I can scratch them off here. I think I'm going to start with the initial report that you mentioned at the beginning of your presentation that came to board.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it did.
Okay.
I was hoping that staff maybe could resend it
Sure.
because
Yeah, definitely.
it's been a while. It's a little foggy in my memory. The next item, thinking about the opportunity to add like the gap closure project, right? Any other opportunities to add potentially other projects? I don't know if there are any shovel ready, but I've heard about projects along Del Monte as well that I don't know, maybe potentially could fall under that. Just putting it out there as an opportunity to,
Sure.
to package things together and streamline things if possible. With the restoration plan and the delineation plan or report, I guess first the restoration plan, is that a document that you'd be able to share with the board? All right. So when we have that, and also I guess pairing it up with the delineation report, it helped me understand a little bit the potential use that we might have for these documents as we continue the process, right?
Sure.
And always my mind is thinking, what documents could we use now, right, to begin whatever work we can with the budgets that we have, with the crews that we have, to maybe dig a little bit deeper, right, in terms of maintenance.
Sure.
All throughout.
Yeah. So the just so the wetland delineation plan that was prepared is the document that's required for CDFW, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, essentially highlights sort of where the water line is in our park and where the water bodies in our park are. You know, we have the lake. We also have the ditch slash creek, I mean, that runs along the side of the island. And so, fortunately, unfortunately, those are all heavily regulated by all these multiple agencies. So we really have to demonstrate that if we're working within what the water line is, what sort of impacts do we have to that water line, and how does that affect, the water quality? How does it affect the water body in and of itself? So the wetland delineation is really the standard document that all the agencies look at, and then that then gets paired with a few things. So during our initial project back in 2021, we prepared sort of an overall plan, like a master plan document that really highlighted where all the improvements needed to take place, whether it was trail accessibility, opening up sight lines, removal of invasive species, removal of brush and debris because of fire challenges. We talked about adding in social trails. So all of that documentation was previously prepared. The restoration plan now takes it just one step further. And so the restoration plan is really the next level of information that says, okay, if we're removing invasive species along the lake bed, and these are the plants that we're going to be replacing those invasive species with, well, where are you getting those plants from? How are they being propagated? How are you going to plant them? And then what is your long-term maintenance to make sure those plants actually survive and thrive? And so the plans that were prepared in 2021 sort of have that all-encompassing take. And then the restoration plan really dials it in. So to your point, there are areas, very minor areas, and I'd have to talk with EMC that if we're not impacting anything that's like emergent wetland or wetland areas or areas that are outside of the wetland delineation, there could be some opportunity to do some long-going maintenance and vegetation removal, that sort of thing. The challenge that we find, though, is like to the crier's point, that entire area that is the island is all considered wetland area. It's just the way it's perceived, and it's the way that it's been kind of categorized. So it's really hard to get in there and do long-term maintenance things because it is designated a wetland. So is there some opportunities to maybe look around the edges? 100%. But in order to be in total compliance with the regulatory agencies, all that work really has to be outside of the wetland delineation. And for our park, that's very few and far between areas, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you for that.
Yeah.
That gives me a little bit more of clarity in terms of trying to move anything forward, really, right?
Well, we can send the plans out that have been prepared so far, that have been submitted to the agencies. We can also send out the restoration plan, and we can get those onto the Have Your Say Monterey website so people can really start to look at them at that documentation. So we can definitely make that public for sure.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's all I have then. Thank you.
Let's go out to the public for any comments.
Diane Nielsen, Seaside resident. I'm kind of confused about if a person is in distress and they know the general area where they are, they would need to make a way to get to that person. But just to walk away and say we can't get there is baffling to me. And I know it's not up to you, but who do I talk to? If somebody's dying on the island or hurt, or mentally incapacitated, they say we can't get there, so they just walk away. I don't see how that can happen. So I would appreciate if anybody has any idea about who we talk to about that. The police department, the ambulance, they just turned away. That doesn't make sense to me. So that was my question. And if you have any direction for us or me, I would appreciate it.
Kathy Bawaya, good evening. Thank you for the presentation. It's really extensive, and as a Monterey resident and a neighbor of Steve's, listening to the screams just turns my stomach. This is what we do. And I understand the waivers. I understand the process. And I think we've been really patient with the process. But in the meantime, your wetland is full of crap. I mean, really, the creek, they're urinating in the creek. They're destroying the area as you were trying to get your processes together. It's so overgrown that we don't feel safe. That to me seems like that's worthy of a waiver. I would really stress the fact that that this is not a safe environment for every entity that I spoke with every discipline I spoke with, because that was chilling. And that's not the first time that we have heard that. But I do think that at some point, citizen safety has to take precedence over what we know. You guys will do a wonderful job restoring the project. We know that. You guys are all very dedicated to that. And I think that that's important. It's going to be a beautiful area when it's done. But in the meantime, something should be done to clear out and at least give the fire access to the area. Thank you.
Any more public comment on that? Anybody on? Seeing none?
Yes, we have one comment
Okay.
on Zoom. Esther, you can go ahead and speak.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Yeah, the presentation was very thorough and great, but frankly, I can't believe that we are expected to sit through the issues that generated this to begin with way back when we started. We've got to find a better way of handling passing the hot potato around from agency to agency when we have a problem back there with encampments and citizen safety. You know, Kathy and I in particular and Scott Hansen, we've been really, really involved in this for a very long time. The problem that is going on there is not new. The problem is it's never been clarified and addressed, so that while we wait for all of this great stuff and permitting and all these other things to come through, that problem has nothing to do with this new process that we're going through. That problem has been there from the very beginning and has still yet to be addressed satisfactorily. You know, we've had this conversation dozens of times. That area, the city of Seaside, once every, I don't know how often, would go in there with hazmat and, you know, spend however much they would do to do a cleanup, and then maintenance falls off and nobody pays attention. We get Monterey PD to go in there with Seaside PD once in a while. Relatively soon after that, one big hit happens and it gets maintained a little bit, but there's absolutely no reason why that has to be put on hold while all of this other stuff is going on. Permits, agencies, all of that weren't even a conversation when we started working on this problem we have. So, you know, Kathy's got a point. Everybody's worried about protecting the watershed and the stream and whatever. This is counterintuitive. I mean, at what point does logic actually take over here? I mean, I don't mean to sound negative on all the work that's been done, but let's get the very beginning problem handled while all this other newer stuff is being brought up and filtered through the process. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Munoz or Monterey representative, any comments or answers or responses other than just accepting it?
No, I don't think there's anyone else.
I didn't think there was anybody else either. So is any comments or responses or suggestions or thoughts? If not, it's okay. We just stepped up.
I know that I got a report about a month ago that the encampment in the wetlands was getting extensive again. So I did have Public Works go out there and clean up and the encampments at that point. Like I said, that was about a month ago. Looks like they came back. So I will talk with Public Works and make sure we go out there again and, do another cleanup. It's really more of, I guess, we'll try and put on a schedule to check every few weeks to constantly go in there and do it because, it's like any transient situation that we deal with. We can tag them, we can clean them up and, they move them on 72 hours and then they come back, after that. So it will be something that we definitely just reiterate and go. And that's what the city of Seaside's doing. And I don't know exactly about the call that came in. I'll check with Seaside PD and see if they were the ones that responded to that, and I'll figure out what happened and see if there's anything else that we can do on that end.
Anybody else want to? Thank you so very much, sir.
Sure. Thank you for having me. My name is Chris Schmidt. I work for the City of Monterey Planning Division. I've been working on this project for the last few years now. I'd just like to speak to just the bare minimum maintenance of these areas. Overgrowth is obviously the big problem. The encampment areas are concealed. Obviously, our emergency services couldn't find this person. This was news to me hearing about this story. Even the basic minimum maintenance is going to require this permitting process, which I understand is tough, and certainly even tougher when we have trouble getting even responses from the agency. So it's something that we're very diligently working after, and our consultants working really hard to do it. They have a lot of expertise working with these agencies as well. So they know typically what they're going to expect. Some of these added things, restoration plan, those requirements that come up late in the process, it's tough to see. That's why we circulate our environmental review documents for these types of comments. We did not receive that comment from the agencies when they were first sent to us. So it's a shame that we get them many months later. However, it is part of the whole process. And if they require it, it's up to the discretion of the coastal staff ecologist to provide that. And so, again, we are really at the behest of these agencies, even for the bare minimum maintenance work. So, I certainly will I have already requested that audio from Mr. Cry, and I will talk to the City of Monterey staff, executive staff, as well as if we can get any way to have these state agencies really understand what our neighborhoods are dealing with, and if they can understand that if there's any other way to exempt even the simple maintenance stuff in the meantime while we have the greater plan move on, especially in the fire hazard areas directly adjacent to lots, we will certainly look at that.
I assume that you'll coordinate with Seaside as far as sharing that information.
Sure, of course, absolutely.
On the same page as far as trying to resolve incidents of that nature.
Yeah.
You have a question, sir?
Just take the question, but it's really shared to everybody, all staff from all agencies. Are there any options for emergency fuel mitigation for fire danger that skirt around any of the wetland delineation requirements. Is that a thing anywhere that anyone has ever utilized in some fashion?
I don't know the answer to that question. I think it really would have to be based on the wetland delineation map, and there potentially could be work outside of the delineation area. But and I can't remember what that space directly adjacent to the neighborhood looks like. But if those are all within the wetlands areas, there's really not a lot that can be done. Certainly something we can start with the coastal staff to talk about, but they are the most responsive. We expect to get that permit first anyway. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think what we can do, the only thing we can do is just accept the report. And I think if that's okay, we'll accept the report and look forward to your next report as we move forward in the months ahead. Item B, set regular meeting calendar for 2025, which will take place on the second Monday of the first month of each quarter.
All right, boy, I just got a quick presentation here. So as you recall, back in February of this year, we established a regular meeting cadence of going the second Monday of the first month of each quarter. Since that establishment, we met on the following dates: March 11th, which was a regular meeting. April 8th was a special meeting because we wanted to have another meeting to discuss the permitting process. 22nd, that was a regular meeting month, but we had a special meeting as we couldn't meet on the regular day. And then we're here today on our regular meeting. So really, we just want to look at potential 2025 schedule. And if we look at the regular scheduled meetings for 2025, we're looking at January 13th, April 14th, July 14th, and October 13th. Those would be the 4 dates that would fall within that cadence. And as always, the board could set up special meetings and can be conducted as needed. So really, with the coordination, the JPA, since we meet here in City Hall, we need to coordinate with the availability of the council chambers. I will say that this meeting time does work. We are pretty well locked in for those dates that I have there. But if there's another schedule that the board would like to look at, we would have to look at those and make sure it's available.
One real quick question. Based on the reports that we're going to getting in the months ahead, that January timeframe, we should be further along by January to provide significant information. Is that a correct statement? I think you nodded your head, yes.
Yeah, and I think if we go with the quarterly meetings on that, 4 months or 3 months in between each time, we're getting good traction and good headway on where we were from the previous meeting. So we're seeing some progress that goes on in there.
Thank you. Any other questions? Well, that's any questions on that? Why don't we go out to the public as far as that as well? Seeing none, is there anybody in the public related to that question? This issue?
Esther?
Yes, hi. I'm just curious, I want to point out we went from having no meetings for a very long time to having these meetings, but I don't think that this is really a schedule that's keeping pace with what we have to keep track of. I mean, is the board getting reports in between these meetings on a monthly basis? If not, I would highly suggest that. And yes, putting more updates on Have Your Say Monterey would be a way for the public to see that there's movement. I mean, meeting quarterly is good compared to not meeting at all for years or months or whatever before, but there's too much going on here that unless there's significant communication in between these quarterly meetings, I don't think that this is having these meetings so spread out is going to help getting this pushed through quicker. If nothing else, it puts everybody involved more in the thick of it, so that by the time you come to these meetings, you already know a lot of what is being presented to you. It just seems that I realize that you guys all have very busy schedules, and I appreciate, hugely that you're giving the time to this that we've never seen before, ever. This park is getting more attention than it ever has, and the JPA is giving it more attention than it ever has. But with so much going on, I would feel better if we saw something in between these these quarterly meetings, at least monthly, so that when they come to you and say, we don't have any representation on the California Fish and Wildlife, we don't have to wait 3 months to find that out. And now that we know, you can go and try and find some other contacts through the cities and other entities. So that might have been already moved ahead a little bit if we weren't having meetings so spread out, or at the very least, communicating in between them. So I would like to suggest that if that's not happening, and if it is, to kind of put more pressure on this. I mean, this is going on a really long time, and it's complex. So if you guys could have something in between, I think it would be helpful to everybody. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any
Could I,
movement on this?
yeah, make a quick comment on that? To Esther's point, I think that at the staff level, there's lots of conversations happening in between the quarterly meetings, obviously. But I think what we're not necessarily seeing is that information reaching the public. And so people are left wondering what's going on. And is there another unforeseen delay that I'm going to be surprised about in 3 months? Or so I think one thing that might, excuse me, help bridge that is if we could maybe shoot for a monthly update from staff, whatever staff from whichever agency is appropriate, that can be posted to the public. And that's also obviously a place where the board can also get this information, because there is a lot that happens at the staff level. And because of the way that the Brown Act works, the board sort of hears about it basically at almost the same time that the public does. And that's part of the frustratingly slow process of having public meetings like this. But maybe there's a way to thread through that a little bit, the monthly reports that can go to the public as well as to the board members to help us stay on track. As Esther said, sort of hear about some of the things going on, because occasionally it's possible that somebody might have an idea that could help that. And if we don't hear about it, we're never going to know. So I like that idea.
I agree with that as well. I think more information out to the public. I personally am okay with the quarterly schedule as well. And one of my original questions or initial questions also was, which was asked earlier, if the quarterly schedule went in line with the schedule of everything that's going on. It kind of sounds like the answer was yes. So if that's the case, then I'm okay with the quarterly schedule. But I think also something that I would maybe encourage is that if there are some significant milestones that happen in between, then maybe staff can communicate that, however that communication happens, to then maybe invite an additional meeting in between those quarterly meetings. So I would support something like that. And I think, at least for me, it would be helpful. And I looked at the agenda coming in today, and I didn't see any attachments. So I'm assuming that this PowerPoint and the handout that we have here was not attached to the agenda, if that information like that could be attached so that I personally can review it before arriving to the meeting, that would be helpful as well.
I believe we've agreed in the past, when we went from 2 to quarterly, that if there was any kind of significant decision-making, we would schedule a meeting. So I think that's already been predetermined. Just a quick question. Is it possible, Mr. Muse, I guess I'll ask you or the consultant, doing a monthly or 45-day kind of update to the community, is that doable without significant impact?
Yes.
Good. So seeing that that's doable, the quarterly meeting seems practical if we get the monthly update to the residents. Are we good with that? And if there needs to be a motion, I think now's that time to follow Mr. Muse's recommendations as such.
I'm happy to move to accept the proposed dates for the 2025 quarterly meetings with the understanding that special meetings will be called as soon as they're needed to move something forward.
And Ken, you had the 30-day written report.
I would be happy to recommend that we have a monthly update from staff of the JPA that will be posted to the public so that everyone can understand where we're at.
And yeah, I think that's a good thing. And it doesn't necessarily have to be 30 days, it could be 35 or 20, just in that window.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Great. Okay, seeing that done, I'd like to call the meeting adjourned at.
May I? Oh, sorry,
Yes, sir.
Dave. May I make just a couple quick little comments? Sure. That are outside of so just to remind folks, we have a lot of things at the Park District in the Let's Go Outdoor brochure that hopefully you all have been looking at, which include a bunch of things happening at Laguna Grande that I just wanted to kind of just throw out really fast just to kind of keep it on your radar. It's fast becoming the birding training central for the Park District. And so we have several. We just had one about a week ago or so. Got another one in November, another in December, another in February. So if you're interested in beginning birding, it's an awesome program that's happening at Laguna Grande, and I encourage you to check that out. And then because it's kind of close by, if I might throw a quick one up to Frog Pond, right up the road. We had on October 12th and another one on March 15th, medicinal plant tours that are happening at Frog Pond. So some cool stuff going on, and please keep an eye on the Let's Go Outdoor brochure and see all the great offerings. Thank you.
Thank you. Possibly in the future, if you could put board member comments or something.
It should be on that. I don't know why.
Yeah, just so that way it stays in line with the agenda. Perfect. If no other comment, we're going to adjourn the meeting at 7:03.